It is, and it's kind of sad for the family to let it go, but we only hold history for a short time.
It used to be the ultimate paradise for Wild West fans. A museum filled with boots, saddles, and the golden memories of America's most beloved cowboy. But now, the Roy Rogers Museum is no more. Its doors are locked, its treasures gone, and fans everywhere are left with one burning question. How could something so iconic just vanish? Was it all about money? Did people simply forget? Or was there something deeper hiding behind those dusty doors? This is the hidden truth behind the fall of the Roy Rogers Museum, and it's more heartbreaking than anyone imagined. The boy behind the cowboy. Long before the white hat, silver spurs, and flashy movie lights, he was just a little boy named Leonard Franklin Sly. Born on November 5th, 1911 in Cincinnati, Ohio, Leonard didn't enter the world with fame. He entered in a tent on 2nd Street, right where Riverfront Stadium would one day stand. It was cold, muddy, and far from glamorous. His father, Andy Sly, hated city life and his job so much that he built a houseboat with his brother using scraps of old wood. Their plan? Escape the noise and give their families a shot at freedom. In July 1912, the Slice set off on the Ohio River toward Portsmouth, their rickety boat groaning with every push of the current. They dreamed of owning land and living free. But in 1913, a flood forced them to drag that old boat onto dry ground and live in it like a tiny house. It wasn't fancy, it was survival, and it shaped Leonard in powerful, lasting ways. By 1919, the family finally got a farm in Duck Run, just north of Portsmouth. Life there was tough, but full of discovery. One weekend, Leonard's father brought home a horse. That simple gift changed everything. Leonard learned to ride, and a seed was planted deep inside him. He and his mother used to yodel across the fields like their own farm-style intercom. It was fun, and it kept them connected. On Saturday nights, the local barn came alive with square dances. Leonard would sing, play the mandolin, and call out the dance moves while neighbors stomped along to the beat. That's where his love for performing truly began. School was a struggle. Leonard went to school in McDermott for a while, but when the family moved back to Cincinnati, he dropped out. He tried night school while working at a shoe factory with his dad, but he was too tired to focus. Eventually, he gave up on school, but not on life. His journey was just beginning. In the late 1920s, the Great Depression was creeping in and jobs were vanishing. Leonard's sister Mary had already moved to California, and the dream of the West called to him. So he and his father packed into a beat-up 1923 Dodge and headed for Los Angeles. They didn't stay long, but Leonard returned a few months later, alone, determined to make something happen. He bounced from job to job, peach picking, driving a gravel truck, working as a migrant laborer, anything to stay afloat. Then came the moment that changed everything. His sister encouraged him to audition for a local radio show called Midnight Frolic. It was totally out of character. Leonard was quiet and shy, but he walked in wearing a Western shirt Mary had stitched by hand, strummed his guitar, yodeled, sang, and won over the crowd. Soon, he joined a group called the Rocky Mountaineers, a band searching for their sound. It wasn't easy. Band members came and went. Money ran dry. Leonard switched groups, instruments, even names, but something always pulled him back to the stage. In 1933, he teamed up again with Bob Nolan and Tim Spencer to create a group that would become legendary, Sons of the Pioneers. They weren't polished. They were raw and determined. Their harmonies were pure, their passion real, and they practiced like their lives depended on it. By 1934, they added fiddle player Hugh Farr, and they had a new name. A radio announcer said they were the Sons of the Pioneers, and it stuck. Soon after, they signed with Decca Records and recorded hits like Tumbling Tumbleweeds and Cool Water. Suddenly, they were everywhere, on the radio, in living rooms across the country. Leonard Sly was finally a name people knew in country music. But his biggest transformation was still ahead. In 1938, Cowboy star Gene Autry ran into a contract dispute, and Republic Pictures went hunting for a new singing cowboy. Auditions stretched across the West. Leonard showed up and won the role. The studio gave him a new name, Roy Rogers, a tribute to Will Rogers, and cast him as the lead in Under Western Stars. That one movie launched Roy Rogers into full-blown stardom. He wasn't just a singer anymore. He was the cowboy hero America needed. With a six-shooter on his belt and a song in his heart, he rode into history. His horse, Trigger, even became a star. Kids waited in lines for his autograph. His face showed up on toys, comics, lunchboxes, you name it. Roy was everywhere. Over the years, he filmed more than 100 westerns, most of them low-budget B-movies. But they had something special, heart, humor, and a sense of right and wrong that people connected with. Roy wasn't just a man in the white hat. He was the good guy. He kissed babies, helped orphans, and stood up to danger with a smile. He lived the values people longed for: honesty, loyalty, and courage during some of the toughest times in American history. But Roy Rogers wasn't just a character on screen. He was a smart businessman. He made sure to negotiate merchandising rights into his contracts, a bold move that made him one of the top-earning entertainers of his time. He knew the power of his image and protected it carefully. Alongside his co-star and future wife, Dale Evans, Roy didn't just build a legacy. They built a movement. Together, they created more than movies. They created hope. And eventually, they created the Roy Rogers Museum, not as an afterthought, but as a piece of the plan. A place to honor the man, the myth, and the magic. But before that museum ever welcomed its first guest, Roy had to live a life so big, so full of spirit, that it could fill those rooms wall to wall. So, how did it all come crashing down? How did a shrine to America's most iconic cowboy fade into the past? The rise of a Western legend and the birth of a museum. By the 1940s, Roy Rogers wasn't just another actor in a cowboy hat. He was a full-blown cultural icon. He wasn't just a cowboy. He was America's dream. Roy Rogers wasn't just a movie star. He was a symbol, a hero, a living, breathing piece of the American dream. With his golden horse Trigger and his loyal dog Bullet by his side, Roy didn't just play the cowboy. He was a cowboy. Millions of fans didn't see him as an actor. They saw him as a man they wished their kids could grow up to be. Honest, brave, kind. But Roy's fame wasn't just on the silver screen. He was everywhere. On the radio, in comic books, singing on records, even dancing to the dreams of children across the country. He starred in over 100 westerns. And through it all, Trigger was right there. Not just a horse. Trigger had his own fan mail. He could do tricks. He toured with Roy, and fans believed he was the smartest horse in Hollywood. When Trigger died in 1965, Roy couldn't bear to let him go, so he had him preserved. Not for fame, not for glory, but for love, for memory, for the fans who had made Trigger a legend too. Roy wasn't building a brand. He was building a myth, and at his side always was Dale Evans, not just his co-star, not just his wife. Dale was a powerhouse of her own, a singer, an actress, a woman of deep faith and endless compassion. Together, they raised a big family, biological and adopted, and faced heartbreaking tragedy. When their daughter Robin, born with Down syndrome, passed away, they didn't hide it. They turned their pain into purpose, advocating for children, for adoption, for kindness. Dale wrote their theme song, Happy Trails. It wasn't just a goodbye, it was a blessing, a reminder to always look forward with hope. In the 1950s, television brought Roy Rogers right into America's living rooms. The Roy Rogers Show ran for years with Dale, Trigger, and Bullet all by his side. Roy played himself, a kind sheriff, a rancher, a hero. Dale was never just a damsel. She matched Roy in grit and grace. Their faces were everywhere. Lunchboxes, toy guns, cowboy hats, comic books, even cereal boxes. Roy's comic book outsold most others. At one point, his merchandise empire was so huge, he rivaled Walt Disney. But here's the thing. Through all the money, the fame, the chaos, Roy never changed. He still lived humbly, treated fans like friends, held tight to his values. And then came his final gift to the people who loved him, the shrine built from dust and dreams. In 1967, Roy opened the Roy Rogers Dale Evans Museum in Apple Valley, California. This wasn't about ego. This was about legacy, gratitude, Fans came from all over the world to see Trigger, preserved in lifelike glory. Bullet, too, and Nellie Bell, the beloved Jeep from the show. Roy's guitars, hats, boots, costumes, and awards filled the walls. Every item told a story. This wasn't a museum. It was a sanctuary. Parents brought their kids. Grandparents cried, remembering black and white matinees and Saturday mornings in front of the TV. The museum became a place of pilgrimage for anyone who still believed in the Wild West or in heroes like Roy. Even in his old age, Roy would show up, sometimes unannounced. Wearing his white cowboy hat and BOLO tie, he'd greet fans with a smile, pose for photos, and thank them for keeping the dream alive. But then, the dream started to die. In the late 1990s, things began to change. Roy, now in his 80s, started slowing down. He still loved the fans, still showed up when he could, but the world was changing. And when Roy passed away in 1998, the country mourned. A legend was gone. President Bill Clinton called him a symbol of kindness and courage. Tributes poured in from everywhere. It felt like the museum would now become sacred ground, a permanent memorial to everything Roy and Dale had built. But behind the scenes, cracks were forming. There was a time when Roy Rogers wasn't just a cowboy. He was a cowboy, America's clean-cut hero, the king of the cowboys, a man who sang, rode tall, and always stood for what was right. For decades, fans from across the country made the pilgrimage to a place that felt like holy ground, the Roy Rogers Dale Evans Museum. It was more than just memorabilia. It was a tribute to goodness, faith, family, and the spirit of the Old West. But now, it's gone, silenced. So what happened? Why did this beloved American institution disappear? This is the untold story of how and why the Roy Rogers Museum came to a heartbreaking end. As the years passed, something began to change. Roy's biggest fans, the ones who grew up watching his black and white films and singing along to Happy Trails, they were getting older, and younger generations, they didn't know who Roy Rogers was. To them, cowboys were old news, replaced by caped superheroes and flashy TikTok stars. The museum tried to adapt. It added interactive exhibits, polished up displays. But deep down, it still felt like a memory. A beautiful one, but a fading one. Behind the scenes, the cost of keeping it all running started to climb. Insurance, staffing, utilities, maintenance. Roy's son, Dusty Rogers, did everything he could, but love wasn't enough. They needed visitors. They needed money. In 2003, the family made a brave move. They'd packed up the museum in California and hauled it halfway across the country to Branson, Missouri. It was a city known for wholesome entertainment and family values, perfect for Roy's spirit. At first, it worked. Fans returned. The media covered the grand reopening. For a moment, it felt like Roy was back. But slowly, the same pattern returned. Crowds thinned, interest faded, and then came the financial crash of 2008. Tourism dried up, and for the Roy Rogers Museum, that was the final straw. Before he died, Roy gave his children a gift, not a physical one, a message. He said, "If the museum ever becomes a burden, don't feel guilty about letting it go." That stuck with them. And in 2009, the Rogers family made the painful decision to close the museum forever. What happened next broke the hearts of fans around the world. The artifacts, Trigger's saddle, Dale's dresses, Roy's guitar, all of it was sent to auction. One by one, the pieces of his legacy were sold. But during that auction, something beautiful happened. When someone bought Dale Evans' horse, Buttermilk, a voice in the crowd began to sing. Soon, everyone joined in. It was quiet, gentle, and absolutely unforgettable. Yes, the museum closed, but Roy Rogers never disappeared. Collectors still cherish his memorabilia. Church groups still share his stories. And his old shows, they found new life on streaming platforms. His values, kindness, courage, faith, they still matter. And in Apple Valley, California, where Roy and Dale lived, you can still find streets bearing their names. You can still feel their presence. The museum was never meant to last forever. It wasn't about things. It was about meaning. Roy Rogers stood for something rare, something we don't see much of anymore: honor, family, integrity. And while the museum may be gone, that message, that spirit, isn't. Because Roy Rogers was never just a cowboy. He was a symbol of what we all wish we could be. And no auction, no closure, no changing world can take that away. Dusty faced a hard truth. The museum wasn't just fading. It was bleeding. He remembered his father's words. Roy had been clear. If the museum ever becomes a burden, shut it down. No rebranding. No relocation. Roy didn't want his legacy kept alive by pity. He wanted it to thrive or rest. So in late 2009, the Rogers family made the hardest decision of all. The Roy Rogersdale Evans Museum would close its doors. Quietly, permanently. What followed wasn't just an auction. It was a national goodbye. In July 2010, Christie's held a farewell unlike any other. Over 300 items went up for bid, each one a memory, each one a chapter of America's golden age of innocence. Fans and collectors didn't come by. They came to preserve. To hold a piece of Roy Rogers was to hold a piece of their own childhood. And then came Trigger, Roy's golden palomino, stuffed, proud, regal, the crown jewel of the museum. Bidding was fierce. He finally sold for $266,500 to Patrick Gotch, founder of RFD-TV, not for a private vault, but for public display. Trigger still stands tall at RFD-TV headquarters in Nebraska, still watched, still loved. Bullet, Roy's loyal German shepherd, was sold for $35,000. Dale's horse, Buttermilk, $25,000. Even Nellie Bell, the museum's famous Jeep, went for over $116,000. But these weren't props. They were cast members in a story America grew up with. The night before the auction, Dusty cried. He knew this was goodbye. To a museum, to a mission, to everything his parents built. And when the final item was sold, someone quietly began to sing. Then another, then dozens, then hundreds. Not a performance, a eulogy. The closing sparked a national conversation about legacy, about memory, about how quickly we forget the people who shaped us once they stopped trending. Major papers ran heartfelt pieces. The New York Times, the Washington Post, the LA Times, all asked, what happens when an icon fades from view? But Roy had planned for this. Long before he passed, he told his kids, don't mourn the museum. Every generation writes its own story. He believed in honoring the past, but never clinging to it. Remember the message, he said. And Roy and Dale's message was simple. Family, faith, honesty, grit. They lived those values every single day. They adopted children, raised money for disabled youth, gave their time, their money, their hearts. In a business full of egos, Roy stood out for his humility. The museum closed, but the message, it got louder. Fans kept the memory alive. Old photos flooded online forums. Families shared stories. Kids sang happy trails on YouTube. Festivals brought back Roy's films. Even libraries held Roy Rogers reading hours. Apple Valley, California, where Roy and Dale spent their final years, became a living tribute. Streets were renamed. A statue of Roy on Trigger was raised, and schools began teaching Roy's values to a new generation. Most of those kids had never seen one of his films, but they knew what he stood for. And then, something unexpected happened. Film scholars, long dismissive, started taking Roy seriously. He was no longer just a singing cowboy. He was a myth-maker, a working-class kid who built an empire by standing tall and doing what was right. He wasn't just an entertainer. He was the blueprint for the American hero. Even Disney historians admitted it. Before Mickey Mouse had toys, Roy Rogers had everything. Lunchboxes, puzzles, pocket knives, a billion-dollar brand, before branding was even a thing. But here's the thing. Roy's name meant something. He wasn't just famous. He was trusted. And that trust never really faded. Streaming platforms picked up his films. Documentaries were made. Dale's book, Angel Unaware, saw a resurgence. Roy's old radio shows were remastered. And for a new generation, his voice returned. When asked what he hoped fans would remember about him, Roy said that I tried to do the right thing. And maybe that's the legacy that matters most. Not the museum, not the memorabilia, but the message. Even now, more than a decade later, kids still hum Happy Trails. Collectors still find old Roy lunchboxes in antique shops. And parents still tell their kids about the cowboy who never lied. Maybe the world moved too fast for the museum. Maybe the internet drowned out men like Roy. But dignity has a way of riding back into town. And what if this isn't the end of the trail? What if right now, someone's building a digital museum, writing a revival script, planning a documentary? What if Roy Rogers is exactly the kind of hero this noisy, confused world needs to rediscover? Because for every fan who ever walked through those museum doors, for every kid who touched Trigger's mane, for every heart that still believes in right and wrong, Roy Rogers never really left. He just rode ahead. The museum may be gone, but the man, he lives on in the stories we tell, in the values we pass down, and in the songs we still hum under our breath. Roy Rogers wasn't just a cowboy. He was a reminder that heroes still matter. If this story moved you, share it with someone who remembers. Hit like, subscribe, and in the comments, tell us, what's your favorite Roy Rogers memory? Because legends don't fade. They echo